Let's continue our talk about the three-point presentation. So I'm going to give you a sample, but I am going to be giving notes on it. So I'm going to be slipping back and forth between being a presenter and being the teacher. So today we are looking at the call to action. Every good presentation should contain a call to action. Let's take a look at what that means. Let's look at how to build an ask that gets results. The takeaway for today's talk: get your main idea in front of your audience now. Don't wait until they're set up. Don't wait until they've heard the introductory stuff. Get your main idea in front of your audience now. And also tell them what you want to happen next. No mystery stories. Don't save any secret endings. Tell them the end of the story first. Okay, that was my takeaway. And that's not part of the three-point presentation. That is really a summary or summation of the main idea as it applies to the person who is listening. So this is how I want you to begin. This is if they only remember one thing from your presentation, this should be it. So the takeaway is key in that it is your first and sometimes your only chance to get your main message across. So don't blow it with deep background. Get to the end of the story first. And now we go to the table of contents, the 3 points you must care about. Not everyone uses a formal table of contents. I do, and I want you to use one during this course. But if you don't have to write it down. But these are the 3 points we care about, and this is what I want you to have in your mind. So here are the 3 points I would be using if I were talking about this element of a presentation. What is the call to action? How does stakeholder management fit in? And finally, own the conversation and set the next. So once you finish the table of contents, you have a couple of choices as to how you present each one of these points. Here in front of you, you see the graphic example, where I'm using a graphic. There's very little text here, and this would be the one page, the one slide they see. There are 2 uses of this. One is if you're giving a very brief presentation, and all you need is one slide for each main point. Or the second is if you plan on going into more detail, but this is what you're putting on screen, and now you're going to talk about it. So if I were live in a classroom situation or live in a boardroom, I might use this technique, leave this up on the screen, say this, CTA, call to action, is what you want the other person to do after they hear your presentation. And now I would step out and I would start talking to people, or take questions, or ask questions, or lead a conversation. But the graphic is going to be on the screen for me to come back to and refer all along. The other extreme is a text-heavy slide, which you are doing for compliance purposes. You're doing because you have to get certain types of information across, and maybe technical information, or if you want to demonstrate that you did this and other people saw it. So if I was doing a presentation on compliance issues in the real world, or what's going to be on the final in your world, I would probably put this in this kind of format, so when they take it away with them, when they take the download or the printed copy, they have the information that I'm responsible for delivering to them. But this is more appropriate for a takeaway situation, for a download situation, than for a live lecture. It is simply too dense and too texty. But I want you to notice a couple of things. The CTA is what you want from the other person. Where did I see this before? Right here. CTA is what you want the other side, the other person. Point 2, CTA should be smart, specific, measurable, actionable. That also sounds familiar, and there that is. So most of the information from here is available here. The graphic format allows you to pack more meaning into each slide, but it requires more explanation. This is a takeaway. If they download this and take it with them, it may not have the same impact as this, where I lay things out very specifically. Now I'm going to address the question, what happens if you have more than three points to make? What happens if you have more information? In a case like this, where I have this slide could be a whole presentation in itself. Here are a couple of techniques for that. So if you want to expand beyond 3 points, this is our typical format. We have the main idea, which is the title. Then we have point 1, point 2, point 3. The takeaway and the final word, bookend this, but they are not formal parts of the presentation. So what if I want to expand beyond this? Well, what I don't want to do is just jam more topics, more points into the main presentation and hope that people can follow along. Once you go above 3, the mind, the neuroscience starts working against you. The mind doesn't really want more than 3 points at any given time. But what the mind does accept is a format more like this, where you're building a tree. So I've got my main points up here, and if I go one hierarchy level lower to the A, B, and C, that are supporting this main point, then it becomes much easier to organize and much more clear to the listener. So let's see an example of that. Remember up here, I've got B1, B2, B3. Well, look at B2, mobilize, influence, persuade in that order. That gets that's not as clear as it could be. So what I'm going to do here is change that a little bit. So I'm going to make the main point a little bit more general and fine-tune stakeholder reaction. Okay, what do you mean by that? And then what do I mean by that is one level below. So I've got 2A, mobilize those who are ready and willing, B2, B2B, 2B, influence and persuade, and 2C, inform non-decision makers or stakeholders with limited power. So instead of building that tree sideways, I'm diving deeper, and I'm putting that option out there if someone wants to follow this presentation down to a more granular level. Another thing you can do is to just stay on this one point. Decisions are motivated by hope or fear. So going back up here, this was my original point, stakeholder analysis, who's the listener. And the third point I want to discuss is people are motivated by hope for gain or fear of loss. But again, that's not really enough information. So what I'm going to do now is develop this graphic of happy and sad, and I'm going to use that to really go into a little bit more depth about this in a discussion type format. So I go to B3, decisions are motivated by hope or fear, and then I'll start talking about it a little bit. But if I want to go into more depth, I'm going to use the graphic and start talking about hope, and then I'm going to emphasize using my space age CGI skills that look like they came straight from Star Wars. I'm going to highlight this element from a graphic and say hope. What do you say to someone who is motivated by hope? You will make a fortune. Sales will grow. You'll outsmart the competition. Everyone is going to be doing this. What about if you're talking to someone who is motivated by fear? Well, now I'm going to say you will save money, or you will protect a fortune. Your expenses will be lower. You will be a winner in your company, a hero in your department. Everyone is already doing this. So I can lay out this content side by side. And again, if you're printing this and taking it away, or if I'm sending this to someone, I may use just this content. But if I'm discussing it live, or if I'm discussing it even in a video, I will use these graphic elements to make my point clearer and to hold people's interest. And that brings us to the final point. The CTA should determine the follow-up conversation. So here I'm not only talking about CTAs, I'm using a CTA. So the idea here is that listeners react to one thing, good presentations get interrupted, use tools to hold focus, and I've got a couple of minor points, and control what you talk about in the next meeting. C2 definitely requires more explanation. So here is what I mean when I say good presentations get interrupted. If I'm speaking to important decision makers, especially Americans and especially Europeans, in Vietnam you won't see this that much except from youngish kinds of venture capital people or maybe entrepreneurs. But older, party people will listen quietly to your entire presentation. But if you're talking to Americans or Europeans or Latin Americans, Middle Easterners, a lot of people are going to say, wait a minute, my time is valuable, tell me more about this. So what I want you to do is prepare for that interruption by putting an image that supports your call to action behind you or in front of them while you're speaking. And the example I'm using is part of our HDC, or Hanoi Digital City pitch, and I'm trying to set up my, my argument that people should be investing in this new project. If I am talking to investors, potential investors, or people who are thinking of renting, or people who are thinking of taking part in this project or some other project that I don't know or care about, I might use an image like this. Now I'm giving my introduction, I'm speaking to them, and behind me is this beautiful, bright, shining, gleaming city of the future with no traffic, clear blue skies, no problems at all. Look, the lights are on in the middle of the day. That's how great this city is. And here's my content: next gen 5G, smart traffic, incentives, connections to airport. An alternative is Hanoi infrastructure has challenges. Now, notice something. I'm saying, look at here and here, here, here. Everything's different except this. My content is identical. But now I'm speaking to someone who is not an investor, who is not driven by hope, but someone who is driven by fear. Fear of failing in this project, or fear of losing money on the real estate they've already bought. So I would use this if I'm talking to someone from the government, and the government's already decided they're going to go ahead with this. And I'm going to be talking about, now you've got to really support my proposal because Hanoi, as you know, has infrastructure challenges. And they look at this and go, yeah, that was me this morning. Finally, the CTA determines the next meeting. What do I mean by that? The CTA is the ask. Now you want the other side to do something. You want them to buy, you want them to hire you, you want them to sell you something at a low price. You have to know what you want and then ask for it at the end of the presentation. Sometimes you're asking them for the big step, for the money, and sometimes you're asking for a little step. Another meeting, read this, know this, believe this. But they should always know what the CTA is. And ideally, they're going to think it was their idea all along, but that's for another time. Okay, final word. The speaker owns the first 30 seconds of a presentation. After that, it's up for grabs. So I want you to make the most of the time you have by being clear about what you want from the other side as early as possible. Thanks very much. I will talk to you again soon.